What happens when a foreign cartel builds a fortress in the heart of Miami, stockpiling weapons and millions in cash just steps from America's financial lifeline? That was the chilling question federal agents confronted in 2025 when an elite task force stormed a sprawling waterfront mansion in the early hours after midnight. To neighbors, it looked like the site of another luxury party. To investigators, it was a battlefield. Inside, they found not only crates of AR-15 rifles, belt-fed machine guns, and ammunition stacked like sandbags, but also binders of VIP passes granting access to Florida's most exclusive nightclubs and political fundraisers. The scene was less a family home and more a cartel stronghold, proof that organized crime had embedded itself into American soil under a cloak of luxury. The scale of the discovery shocked even veteran agents. Hidden rooms revealed millions in vacuum-sealed cash bundles. Garages brimmed with assault rifles and tactical gear. Guest lists contained the names of celebrities, businessmen, and even local officials who had mingled with cartel operatives. According to Reuters reporting this summer, at least 150 people across Florida are now under federal indictment, from nightclub promoters to mid-level port workers accused of facilitating the Venezuelan network. The raid confirmed what whispers in Miami's nightlife had suggested for years. A Venezuelan cartel had bought its way into Florida's high society, operating not as a shadowy gang, but as a parallel economy. This revelation did not emerge overnight. Federal surveillance teams backed by Homeland Security and the DEA had been quietly mapping cartel routes since 2021. They intercepted encrypted chats, tracked financial wires from Caracas to Miami, and built a case showing how narcotics, weapons, and influence were traded in a revolving door. U.S. officials have since called it a cartel invasion without bullets and infiltration of politics and business rather than street shootouts. Defense analysts at Janes describe it as a new template for criminal enterprises. Cartels no longer need to wage wars in the open. They only need to purchase access. The implications stretch far beyond Florida. With Donald Trump in the White House for a second term, his administration has labeled cartel infiltration a domestic national security threat. At NATO briefings this year, U.S. officials warned allies that cartel money moving through Miami real estate could also launder funds for hostile states, including Russia and Iran. The timing is crucial as Ukraine intensifies its counteroffensive with NATO-supplied F-16s and as Israeli-Iranian tensions spike over drone strikes in the Gulf. American vulnerabilities at home are now part of the global chessboard. If Florida's ports can be penetrated by cartel networks, what stops them from being exploited by foreign intelligence services as well? Experts draw sobering comparisons. In Europe, Russian oligarchs once used London real estate to mask illicit wealth, earning the nickname Londongrad. In 2025, Miami risks becoming Caracograd, a safe harbor for narco-political networks. One analyst at DW warned, every dollar laundered is a bullet paid for. Every condo bought in cash is another layer of protection for traffickers who erode the very rule of law. Yet the Miami raid revealed more than corruption, it revealed fragility. Local police admitted privately that the firepower uncovered in cartel villas rivaled their own SWAT teams. Photographs showed anti-aircraft launchers and rocket-propelled grenades within 20 miles of tourist hubs like Orlando. The fact that such weapons could be smuggled and stored in American suburbs without detection raised urgent questions about oversight. So as Florida confronts this scandal, the question lingers if a Venezuelan cartel could live like royalty in Miami for nearly a decade. What does it say about America's ability to defend itself not just from drugs, but from the corrosion of democracy itself? How did a nation once hailed as the jewel of Latin America collapse into a narco state that could export corruption straight into Florida? The story begins not in Miami's glittering skyline, but in Caracas, where decades of mismanagement, sanctions, and authoritarian rule hollowed Venezuela into fertile ground for cartels. By the mid-2000s, the country was already buckling under runaway inflation, food shortages, and political purges. But where ordinary citizens saw collapse, generals and politicians saw opportunity. Out of the ruins rose what investigators dubbed Cartel de los Soles, the Cartel of the Suns, named after the insignia of Venezuela's military generals. Rather than fighting traffickers, elements of the Venezuelan state joined them. Colombian cocaine poured into Venezuela across porous borders. Cargo planes escorted by military convoys loaded up on drugs at clandestine airstrips. Ports along the Caribbean became gateways not just for oil, but for narcotics bound north. Soldiers once tasked with guarding sovereignty now guarded smuggling routes. In a system where public salaries were worthless, trafficking offered billions in untaxed profits. Analysts from BBC News estimate that by 2015, Venezuela had become responsible for facilitating as much as 15% of global cocaine exports, a staggering figure for a single collapsing nation. The state's transformation into a narco-political machine had direct consequences for the United States. With the economy in freefall, Venezuelan elites looked northward. Miami, with its shared language, established diaspora, and thriving real estate market offered the perfect sanctuary. Families fleeing hyperinflation parked wealth in condominiums overlooking Biscayne Bay. Cartel operatives slipped among them using the same banks, the same lawyers, and the same shell companies. What began as drug trafficking quickly evolved into influence trafficking. By the early 2020s, evidence surfaced that Venezuelan money was pouring into Florida campaigns, fundraisers, and even local business development projects. According to U.S. Treasury findings in 2023, more than $1.2 billion in suspicious Venezuelan-linked real estate transactions had been flagged in Miami-Dade County alone. This financial infiltration mirrored patterns seen in Europe, where Russian state-linked figures had laundered billions through London and Cyprus. Once again, corruption blurred into legitimacy, making the task of enforcement exponentially harder. But the Venezuelan story is not just one of drugs and dollars, it is also one of geopolitics. As Venezuela grew isolated under sanctions, it deepened ties with Russia, Iran, and China. Defense News reported in 2024 that Venezuelan security forces were experimenting with Iranian drones and Russian electronic warfare systems, creating a hybrid of cartel muscle and state-backed weaponry. This convergence means that Venezuelan cartels entering Florida are not merely criminal syndicates. They may serve as extensions of geopolitical adversaries. Imagine cartel operatives laundering cash in Miami while simultaneously procuring components for Iranian drones or facilitating Russian arms transfers. The overlap is no longer theoretical, it is strategic. President Trump's administration in briefings earlier this year described Venezuela as a hostile narco state exporting instability into the Western Hemisphere. NATO partners echoed the concern, especially as Venezuelan cocaine routes increasingly intersected with West African smuggling corridors used by Russian Wagner affiliates before their dissolution. The lesson was clear: the collapse of Venezuela created not just a criminal empire, but a potential bridge for adversarial influence inside US borders. So here's the paradox. Venezuela's decay enriched a generation of cartel bosses who now walk the streets of Miami in tailored suits, buying condos and donating at fundraisers. Yet their rise is inseparable from the geopolitical ambitions of powers hostile to the West. As Ukraine's counteroffensive strains Russia, and as Iran tests US resolve in the Middle East, could Venezuela's cartels become silent partners in a larger conflict? The collapse of a state created a cartel. That cartel found a home in Florida. And now the question becomes unavoidable: how deep does this Venezuelan influence run, and who in America has already been compromised? If Venezuela's collapse created the cartels, Florida gave them a stage. Few places on Earth offer the same combination of geography, wealth, and anonymity as the Sunshine State. For decades, Miami has been a magnet for Latin American elites escaping instability, its skyline filled with glass towers, its ports bustling with global commerce, its nightlife synonymous with excess. That environment became fertile ground for a Venezuelan cartel determined not just to move cocaine, but to embed itself in America's economy. The strategy was deceptively simple. First, real estate. Cartel operatives purchased multi-million-dollar condos in Miami Beach, often in cash, creating instant legitimacy. According to data flagged by the U.S. Treasury between 2020 and 2024, Venezuelan-linked buyers spent over $800 million on Miami property money that investigators now suspect was funneled directly from narcotics. Shell companies masked ownership while developers turned a blind eye so long as towers kept rising. These assets not only laundered profits, but granted cartel figures the image of successful entrepreneurs indistinguishable from wealthy expatriates. Second, nightlife. South Beach's clubs became their camouflage. VIP tables, champagne showers, and celebrity sightings allowed cartel bosses to blend seamlessly into Miami's social scene. Behind velvet ropes, introductions to politicians, promoters, and local officials were made. Cash exchanged hands as casually as drink orders. In one nightclub later raided by the DEA investigators discovered hidden safes stuffed with cocaine and ledgers of payments to security staff. It was the perfect theater one FBI official told The Guardian in 2025. Everyone saw them as party kings, not traffickers. Third, logistics. Tampa's ports became critical entry points where shipping containers from the Caribbean carried more than bananas or textiles. Hidden compartments stuffed with cocaine or heroin slipped through with the help of bribed dock workers. Homeland Security seizures in 2023 revealed over 5 metric tons of narcotics hidden in containers bound for Tampa, an amount large enough to supply several major U.S. cities. Orlando, meanwhile, became a hub for distribution. Its tourist-driven anonymity provided cover for couriers transporting shipments along I-95 and I-75 to the Northeast and Midwest. But the cartel's expansion wasn't just about smuggling routes, it was about embedding within immigrant communities. Venezuelans fleeing economic chaos sought stability in Florida. Amid them, cartel associates leveraged kinship ties, blending family legitimacy with criminal enterprise. For law enforcement, distinguishing honest migrants from operatives was like finding a needle in a stack of needles. This overlap created dangerous optics with innocent Venezuelan families sometimes stereotyped as cartel-linked, complicating community trust. Experts note the cartel operated less like a gang and more like a multinational corporation. It opened restaurants, shipping companies, and import-export firms as fronts. Bank accounts in Miami handled clean money while encrypted networks moved dirty cash offshore. By 2024, Florida investigators estimated the cartel was laundering up to $2 billion annually through seemingly legitimate businesses. The sophistication left even veteran agents stunned. This expansion also carried broader geopolitical consequences. In NATO briefings this year, analysts warned that Florida's cartel infrastructure mirrored patterns seen in southern Europe, where criminal syndicates act as gateways for Russian and Middle Eastern influence. With US-China tensions escalating in the Pacific and NATO bracing for prolonged war in Ukraine, adversaries now watch how easily America's defenses can be bypassed with cash and corruption. As one DW analyst remarked, a cartel that buys influence is more dangerous than one that fires bullets because it erodes institutions from within. Florida's glittering facade then became the cartel's greatest weapon. Behind neon lights and penthouse views, it built an empire that laundered billions, distributed drugs nationwide, and shielded itself with the respectability of high society. The question now is not whether the cartel infiltrated Florida, it is how far those tentacles reached into politics, policing, and even national security. And that leaves a haunting thought: if Miami can be turned into a cartel playground, what other American cities are next in line? What happens when crime is no longer hidden in the shadows, but instead sits at the head table in Miami's most exclusive clubs? By the mid-2020s, the Venezuelan cartel's greatest weapon was not firepower, but legitimacy. Their empire ran on money stacks of cash that bought silence access and even admiration. In Florida, where luxury itself is a form of currency, they used wealth to turn criminality into prestige. Lavish waterfront parties became their camouflage. Guests arriving at mansions found fleets of Lamborghinis and Rolls Royces outside champagne flowing inside, and private security turning away anyone not on the list. What few realized was that these gatherings weren't just social spectacles, they were business. Behind closed doors, cartel operatives handed out envelopes of cash to nightclub promoters, introduced themselves to local officials, and mingled with athletes and celebrities who rarely asked too many questions. To the outside world, they weren't fugitives, they were patrons. The tactic proved devastatingly effective. According to a 2024 investigation cited by the Guardian, cartel leaders spent over $50 million annually on hospitality, a category that included everything from VIP club access to political donations. Customs officials, bouncers, even casino managers found themselves on payrolls. A port inspector who waved through a single shipment of cocaine could walk away with enough money to retire early. By the time federal agencies noticed the pattern, the cartel had already woven itself into the fabric of Florida's nightlife and business culture. For investigators, this presented a new kind of challenge. Traditional law enforcement targets criminals who operate in darkness. Here, the traffickers operated in neon lights shielded by the same velvet ropes and guest lists that protected the wealthy elite. They weren't hiding in shadows, they were hiding in plain sight, one DEA official told DW. That blurred line between crime and celebrity created what experts now call a culture of complicity. The phenomenon isn't unique to Florida. In southern Italy, the 'ndrangheta blurred into local business life. In London, Russian oligarchs purchased status with mansions and football clubs. Miami became America's version of this problem, where crime bought not just real estate, but respectability. Western analysts now argue that this erosion of institutional trust is more destabilizing than open violence. As Professor Robert Mugga, a global security expert, noted in a BBC interview this year, a bullet can kill a man, a bribe can corrupt an entire system. The cartel also exploited optics. Security teams dressed as like corporate executive bodyguards. VIP passes made their movements look legitimate. Even when photographs later surfaced showing known traffickers at political fundraisers, many guests claimed ignorance. Others admitted they knew, but didn't care the money was too good to turn away. This mirrors the cautionary warnings NATO intelligence officials have shared in 2025 that adversarial states may use criminal networks as soft power tools, blending illicit finance with political influence to undermine Western resilience. The sums involved were staggering. Investigators discovered that a single Miami nightclub promoter moved nearly $12 million in laundered cartel cash through events in just 2 years. A port employee earning $60,000 annually somehow owned 2 luxury condos on Miami Beach. Each revelation pulled back the curtain on a deeper network of corruption that reached from loading docks to cocktail lounges. For communities, the fallout was sobering. Many Venezuelan immigrants had fled precisely the kind of corruption now arriving on U.S. soil. Community leaders warned that ordinary families risk being stereotyped as cartel sympathizers even as they themselves suffered intimidation from the same networks. Meanwhile, overdose deaths in the U.S. surged. CDC figures show over 110,000 drug fatalities in 2024, many traced to shipments funneled through Florida. The human toll underscored that behind the glitter of Miami luxury lay a trail of broken lives across the country. The lesson was chilling in an age when cartels buy legitimacy. No velvet rope is safe, no guest list is clean, and no official is immune from temptation. But with cash as both weapon and shield, the Venezuelan cartel made itself nearly untouchable. And so the question deepens: if money can buy protection so easily in Florida, how long before other foreign powers or criminal networks copy the same playbook across the United States? What if the mansion down the street wasn't just a luxury home, but an armory brimming with weapons capable of outgunning local police? That was the reality uncovered in Florida when federal raids revealed arsenals more suited for a battlefield than a suburb. If money bought legitimacy for the Venezuelan cartel, firepower secured its survival, and the scale of its weapons pipeline stunned investigators. The cycle was chillingly efficient. Cocaine moved north, guns flowed south. Florida, with its sprawling ports and gun show loopholes, became both a stockpile and a transit hub. Homeland Security seizures in Tampa uncovered crates mislabeled as construction equipment that actually contained AR-15 rifles, high-capacity magazines, and tactical vests. In one suburban warehouse near Orlando, agents found belt-fed machine guns, anti-tank rockets, and even man-portable air defense systems, the kind of anti-aircraft launchers seen in war zones, not American neighborhoods. Investigators traced the origins of these weapons to 2 sources. First, U.S. soil itself. Straw purchasers exploited lax state laws, buying dozens of rifles legally, then funneling them through shell companies to cartel safe houses. Second, Venezuela's own military. Corrupt officers siphoned surplus weapons from stockpiles, selling them off the books for quick profit. Jane's Defense Weekly reported in early 2025 that at least 25% of Venezuelan security force inventories are unaccounted for, much of it suspected to be circulating in cartel hands. The result was alarming: a foreign cartel with a private arsenal inside the United States. DEA officials admitted that had one of their raids gone wrong, local police would have faced a firefight on par with urban warfare. One ATF whistleblower described the risk bluntly: "We were staring at a Waco-style siege, only this time with anti-aircraft missiles." The cartel didn't just hoard weapons, it flaunted them. Bodyguards patrolled Miami in armored SUVs equipped with night vision gear and suppressed rifles. Social media photos later seized as evidence showed traffickers posing with rocket launchers beside champagne bottles. This brazen display reinforced their aura of untouchability, intimidating rivals and warning off potential informants. Strategically, the weapons pipeline created a national security dilemma. If Florida could be used to stockpile foreign military hardware, it opened a back door for adversarial states to pre-position arms on U.S. soil. Defense analysts at DW warned that this model could be exploited by hostile governments seeking to bypass direct confrontation. The parallels are stark as NATO braces for Russia's expanded drone warfare in Ukraine, and as Iran arms militias across the Middle East, America is discovering cartel arsenals at home that mirror the very conflicts abroad. President Trump's National Security Council this year authorized a multi-agency task force combining the DEA, ATF, and Pentagon intelligence. Their assessment labeled cartel stockpiles in Florida a latent insurgency threat. The idea was not that cartels intended to wage open war with U.S. forces, but that their capacity to resist law enforcement raids with military-grade weapons raised the bar of risk to unprecedented levels. The public shock was immense. News of rocket-propelled grenades found just miles from Disney resorts forced Floridians to confront a new reality that their communities were not only financial playgrounds for cartels, but potential battlegrounds. Local leaders scrambled to reassure residents, while critics demanded why such arsenals had been allowed to grow unchecked. The Venezuelan cartel had rewritten the rules once again. Drugs made them rich, money bought them legitimacy, but weapons gave them teeth sharp enough to challenge the very sovereignty of the United States if left unchecked. And so the looming question is this: if a foreign cartel could quietly build an arsenal rivaling a small army in Florida, what does it mean for America's broader fight against organized crime and hostile states seeking new front lines? By the time the Miami mansion raid made headlines, the Venezuelan cartel's Florida empire was already unraveling. Federal agencies had pieced together years of surveillance, financial tracking, and undercover operations. What followed was one of the most sweeping crackdowns in modern U.S. history. Over several months, joint task forces involving the DEA, FBI, Homeland Security, ATF, and U.S. Marshals executed synchronized raids across Miami, Tampa, and Orlando. The results stunned the public. Over $30 million in cash seized, hundreds of assault rifles confiscated, and more than 150 individuals indicted, including nightclub promoters, port officials, and businessmen once seen as respected figures. These operations revealed the true scope of infiltration. Luxury condos in downtown Miami concealed hidden vaults. Suburban warehouses doubled as armories. Even legitimate law firms and real estate developers were implicated in laundering cartel wealth. This wasn't just crime, it was parallel governance, one federal prosecutor explained to Reuters. Cartel money had bought silence, reshaped neighborhoods, and even influenced local elections. Florida, in effect, had been partially purchased. The fallout extended beyond criminal courts. Miami's nightlife industry, once a symbol of excess, was forced into retreat as federal agents scrutinized club owners and promoters. Real estate developers faced congressional inquiries over millions in untraceable Venezuelan-linked transactions. Lawmakers in Washington and Tallahassee promised tighter oversight on foreign cash purchases, banking loopholes, and port security. President Trump's administration framed the bust as proof of a broader truth. The United States must treat organized crime not as an urban nuisance, but as a national security threat. For Venezuelan immigrants, the moment was bittersweet. Many had fled Caracas to escape the very corruption now exposed in Miami. Yet media narratives risked tarring entire communities with cartel suspicion. Community leaders worked urgently to remind Americans that most Venezuelans were victims of narco-politics, not its beneficiaries. As one pastor in Doral told BBC News, "We came here to live free of the corruption. We should not be judged by the criminals who followed us." Internationally, the crackdown reverberated like an earthquake. Caracas denied involvement, dismissing U.S. accusations as political theater. Yet evidence seized in Florida, including Venezuelan-issued security badges and military-grade weapons traced back to state arsenals, painted a damning picture. NATO allies expressed alarm, seeing parallels with Russian and Iranian methods of exploiting criminal networks abroad. In Brussels, officials noted that cartels blending with politics mirrored patterns of hybrid warfare, where corruption weakened states from within rather than confronting them openly. Still, even in triumph, U.S. agents cautioned against complacency. Cartels are resilient. Networks dismantled in one city reappear in another. Already chatter on encrypted channels suggests Venezuelan operatives are probing alternative routes through Central America and Mexico. Experts warn that unless demand for narcotics decreases and financial laundering channels are shut down, another iteration of this empire will rise again. The lesson is sobering. A cartel armed with billions in cocaine profits, crates of weapons, and the willingness to buy protection can erode the foundations of even the most powerful nation. Florida became the test case. For a time, Miami glittered as a cartel kingdom, proof that organized crime does not always storm gates with guns, but slips in through the front door with money and charm. And so America is left with a haunting question: if this infiltration could happen in Florida, how many other cartels or adversaries are already buying their way into U.S. communities waiting for their moment to strike? The Venezuelan cartel's rise in Florida exposed a new model of organized crime, one built less on violence than on wealth and influence. A midnight raid in Miami uncovered millions in cash military-grade weapons and VIP passes linking traffickers to Florida's elite. Born from Venezuela's collapse into a narco state, the cartel exploited corruption and economic chaos to expand into the United States. Miami's real estate, Tampa's ports, and Orlando's anonymity provided perfect cover for smuggling, laundering, and embedding within communities. What made the cartel uniquely dangerous was its ability to buy legitimacy. Lavish parties, political donations, and bribes blurred lines between crime and high society. Meanwhile, Florida became a weapons pipeline, stockpiling arsenals rivaling military forces. By 2025, the US government labeled cartel infiltration a national security threat, warning NATO that such networks could serve as conduits for Russian, Iranian, or Chinese influence. The federal crackdown dismantled much of the cartel's Florida empire, indicting more than 150 people and seizing millions. Yet experts caution victory is fragile. Cartels adapt quickly, and unless the root causes drug demand and financial corruption are addressed, new networks will rise. The question remains, has America closed the door or just delayed the next invasion?